This evening I was watching a discussion about the kingdom of God, and there were a couple interesting points that were brought up in it that I felt like had a lot of application for me, and maybe they will for some of you, and so I wanted to share them. One of the individuals was talking about how the world has, typically when you put men in charge of anything, and this is true throughout history, they start to create power structures and positions and tiers of authority, and there's certain privileges and pay structures and benefits and fame that come along with each of those tiers, and how men are continually trying to climb that ladder, and the world, just generally speaking, the world, in contrast to the kingdom of God, is always building these things, and men are always trying to go up them and to become something in the eyes of other men. And how the kingdom of God is largely a reversal of that, almost I hate to use the word deconstruction because of what it's come to mean, but the kingdom of God deconstructs that process. When you think about Jesus and who he was and who he valued, who he spent the most of his time with, who he dedicated his attention to. When Jesus spoke to the men at the top of that worldly power structure, men like Pilate and the high priests and the Sadducees, a lot of times, especially around his crucifixion, he spent very little time and attention even talking to those men. And at some points it's almost like Jesus is absent when he's talking to some of the most important people that are mentioned in the Bible story, and he just doesn't have a lot of time for them. And then we see Jesus, when he is going about in his ministry, dealing with common everyday, even very low class, sickly people and humble people, and Jesus has all the attention in the world for people like that. And so the kingdom of God, and Jesus preaches throughout his ministry that the greatest in the kingdom of God, this kingdom, this structure that's being built by God rather than by the design of men, the greatest in that kingdom is going to be the one who lowers himself, who goes down the tiers, who doesn't demand all of the respect and the authority and the fame and the privileges, but who acts as a servant for other men, to take care of small needs, to do things that proud men would never do. That person is going to be the greatest in the kingdom of God. We see this repeated process all throughout the scriptures, how men elevate themselves in pride. You see it with the Tower of Babel. You see it with men like Pharaoh and the Egyptians, the Babylonians and Nebuchadnezzar, and these other rulers, and even on individual scales, right? These men who lift themselves up in pride, and once they get to a certain point, God says, I'm tearing you down, and that's what he does. And then the individuals that he selects to be the most significant in his gospel plan are people like Mary, who in Luke 3 praises God because he's lifted up her and her lowly estate to give her a position of great honor. God honors these very humble people, and that's who, the humble people that come up to Jesus are the ones who get his greatest compliments in the Gospels. It got me thinking about how sometimes that worldly way of thinking, the tier structure and the creation of that and climbing the ladder, that can even creep into the church. A lot of times we have people who are trying to climb that ladder of significance to get their name out there, to fill those, conference spots, to build up their audience because they think that they have something that needs to be heard, whether it's a blog or a YouTube channel, like mine. And I think that's why I found this to be a significant, important application for me, because I feel this temptation in me is to climb that ladder. Whether it's for just the fame, the recognition that come with that, whether it's so that you are in church community and you get recognized and people know your name, or maybe it's to sell books, or to make some kind of financial profit off of it, right? This creeps into the church, and I think it's a tactic of the devil to get even the church to start thinking like the world and creating its structures the way the world does, rather than creating them the way that the king of the kingdom of heaven models it. The problem with that can be that a lot of times these are the men that we look up to. You know, the well-known ones, the one who have all the keynote slots and and write the best books and have the most popular blogs. These are the men we look at and we think, that's the role model that I want. And I can say personally, when I was a younger guy, growing up in the church, those were the people that I looked up to, the names that I recognized, the people that were on the church media, across the board, who were well known, and I thought those are the men I want to be like. But I think we should be careful about that, because certainly not all those men have nefarious or selfish motives or proud motives, but some do. And when I look at the scriptures and I look at who Jesus really honored, it makes me wonder if some of the best role models are actually unknown names. They're hidden in our churches because they've gone through this process of being tempted maybe to achieve a name for themselves, and then they've studied Christ and they've torn that down, and they've sunk back down into what we might consider obscurity, and they're living in our small, local congregations doing servant work and uninterested in spreading their name and uninterested in getting people to look at them and giving away the authority that they could have claimed for themselves, or giving away the opportunities for respect that they could have claimed for themselves, and giving them to other people, giving opportunities to others, so that they are growing the kingdom of God in a broader way, in a more building out a greater foundation for the church in the future, rather than just building it all on themselves and trying to draw people's attention to themselves. So maybe before you go picking some famous name to be the person that you look up to, maybe look around your small local church first for somebody who models. Another application that this brought to mind was that we've been tasked as Christians to communicate the gospel to the world, to tell people about the good news. And that's getting harder and harder in our culture, communicating that in an effective way. And how do we do that in an effective way? Words aren't going to be enough. And the world, I think, is even going to be quicker than the church at recognizing people who are just a lot of words, maybe really eloquent words, maybe words spoken from a respected platform, but just words. They're going to recognize the hypocrisy in that. They're going to recognize that some of those individuals who are very good speakers are not very good doers, and that they may only be doing that in order to get their name out to the masses, right? The world's going to see that. If we're going to convince the world in the 21st century that the gospel is something that that the kingdom of heaven is something that they need to be in, it's going to happen through our actions. And what actions? The actions of the servants, right? The actions of those greatest in the kingdom of God. And one thing that I've realized in just making this YouTube channel and writing books is that sometimes those actions, those servant activities, those are going to pull you away from the online stuff, from the writing, from the things, from the blog, from the things that are going to get you 1,000 likes on Facebook. They're going to pull you out into your community and in the lives of real people. You're going to have to do things that no one ever sees, no one ever realizes. But that's servant work, right? It's not keynote speaker work. It's not fame work. It's not something that's going to get you popular. But that's what's going to convince the world of the gospel. And I think the more we're involved in that, probably the less time we're going to have to spend on some of these things that stroke our own egos. So, all that to say, some of the best examples of Christ-likeness are probably very hidden from us unless we look very closely. And if we want to see the real Christ, we're not always going to see him in the pulpit or on a YouTube channel or on a blog post. You're going to see him with the poor and with the sick. And you're probably actually not going to see him because he's going to be doing all those things and he's not going to have to announce them to the world. So you're going to have to look close if you're going to find a role model that looks like Jesus. But when you find one, that'll be somebody worth mimicking your life off of the way that they mimic it off of Jesus.